The crimes of the South start the root of secession of the first 7 states, and that being the institution of slavery, a centuries-old practice that Northern Republicans were bent on ending. However, in Georgia, one of the oldest states, a man named Francis Sorrel, who had made a career off commerce, had made also his career off the slave trade within the country. Francis Sorrel was born in Saint Dominique in 1793, today Haiti. He was the son of a French soldier and a black woman who worked on his father's sugarcane plantation. Francis was almost entirely raised by slaves on the plantation, as it's generally believed his father was disgusted by his, in quote, bastard son. During the Haitian Revolution, Francis was smuggled to protection in Port-au-Prince instead of being massacred as other plantation owners were. This is where we see the young man rise to prominence in business, starting simply as a clerk in a local merchant company, where he would soon move from Port-au-Prince to Baltimore in Maryland. It was here Sorrel would rise to prominence. Soon he would open a shipping company with his supervisor, Henry Douglas. They would open the Douglas and Sorrel Shipping Company in Savannah, Georgia. And this is where our tale of this infamous home begins. Francis became increasingly wealthy from sugar, molasses, cotton, and interstate slave trading, and he wanted to show his wealth to the people of Savannah. So in 1835, he commissioned Irish-born architect Charles Cluskey with the construction of the 16,000 square foot project that would be completed over 5 years, costing Sorrel $12,000, which today would be near $419,551.36. The house was built on the ground where British ramparts were built during the siege of Savannah during the American Revolution, which would be one of the bloodier battles of that war. And it still sits today at 6 West Harris Street, Madison Square, Savannah, Georgia. Francis Sorrel had become friends with a rising engineering officer who had been assigned to building river defenses in Georgia, especially near the newly annexed Floridian border. This officer would be Robert E. Lee, the future commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. One of Francis's sons, Moxley, would later join the Confederate Army, where he would serve as Chief of Staff to General James Longstreet, 1st Corps Army of Northern Virginia, and he would later command a brigade in that army. But the Sorrels would sell the house and move to the next house over on 12th in 1859, 2 years before the American Civil War would begin. He would sell it to a northern businessman named Henry Weed. The house would remain in the Weed family until 1914, which then it would remain vacant until 1940. In 1940, the Savannah Historical Society would open it to the public as a historic site in Savannah, especially one that survived Sherman's March to the Sea. 14 years later, the house would be declared a historical landmark and be given protection as it's a place in not only the history of Georgia, but also in the United States history. But that is not what makes this house famous. Most people have probably never even heard of Francis Sorrel or his business enterprise. The Sorrel Weed House is known as one of the most haunted houses in the United States of America. And why is that? Well, Francis Sorrel, like other men of the era, had a very dark past. Now, the story you have heard so far was that of an inspiring young mixed-race man who, through all adversity, rose from the ashes of the Haitian Revolution and became one of the richest men in Georgia, possibly the United States. But as we said, there's a darkness that follows this era, and one of the shadows that haunt this home is believed to be Francis's second wife, Matilda. Now, the tale goes Matilda had discovered that Francis was having an affair with one of the young slave girls in 1859. She had a horrible mental breakdown, which resulted in her throwing herself from the second or third story window to her death. The young slave girl, Molly, who was probably not even Francis's slave by what the records show, was then found to have hung herself in the carriage house of the home. Now, I say the word affair very loose. And also, Melissa was not actually at 6 West Harris, but next door, 12th West Harris. But it's generally believed she haunts the house she had spent the majority of her time, especially considering she would have spent most of the marriage in 6 West Harris, considering her suicide coincided with the family's move. As for Molly, as I said, affair is very loose term. A common practice in the antebellum South was slave masters would often take advantage of their female slaves and force them to have relations with them. To add to this horror story for this young black girl, it's also by record believed she did not even belong to Sorrel. Instead, she was being loaned to him from a neighbor. It's also generally believed that when word that Sorrel, who was half black, the child of a Frenchman and Haitian woman, was having relations with a slave girl, he ordered his overseers to hang her in the carriage house. And generally the death of a slave would not be investigated by the authorities and would just be ignored, generally. Molly and Matilda are generally believed to haunt the house, as does, by some reports, Francis and his eldest son, Francis Jr. People believe that Francis is what could be called a dark presence that keeps the others in a state of fear and check. The house offers tours and paranormal investigations. Friend of the channel, Triniti, had actually recently returned from one in which she sensed the presence of all 4. As for Moxley, Francis's war hero son, who fought in the Army of Northern Virginia, he would actually go on to live out his life in Virginia. However, when he did pass, he would be buried with his family in Savannah, Georgia. Thank you for joining us today. I know this is different and seems similar to our Gettysburg Homestead video, but in a way they are. They are stories of the robbing of innocence and the scary truth of that era. Please like, share, and comment if you're new to the channel or a returning viewer and not yet. Please subscribe. With the holidays coming, I will have a slower output of content, but we're still going to keep going. Thanks again for joining us, and see you in the next one.